Yo guys, welcome back to the Marin Bikes YouTube channel. Duncan Shaw here. I have got my Rift Zone Carbon 2 brand spanking new built up, and on today's video we're going to do a how to wheelie video for you guys. Like I said, this is a brand new bike. We will do a full video dedicated to going through this bike once I've got a little bit more time getting used to it, but in the meantime we're going to run through some tips and tricks of how to perfect those wheelies. So before we get started, we're going to have a little look about how to set up your bike to give you guys the best possible chance of learning this trick. A few tips and tricks for this is I like to put my seat, if you've got a dropper post, obviously it's easier to change, but if you don't, you can still do it. And I would tend to put it somewhere in the middle, because that just gives you a little bit of flexibility in terms of where your legs are, but it means you're not too crouched into the bike. So I would tend to go for about halfway up. In terms of gearing, I would generally use one of the middle gears, so sort of like third or fourth on the back cassette if you've got a sort of medium size single sprocket. But again, you guys can just kind of play with it, but the general rule of thumb is you don't want the super easy gear and you definitely don't want a hard gear. It's just that sort of perfect balance point that's going to give you the best possible chance of getting that front wheel up in the air and then keeping it up. Another thing to add before we get started is you want to keep your back brake covered at all times, and by covered I mean keeping your finger or fingers on your back brake at all times, even if you're not pulling it, just so you have that there as an option to pull if you're going too far back, because the last thing you want to do is flip over the back and land on your ass basically, because that's not going to be fun for anyone. So now we've got the bike set up ready to go, we can now move on to look into getting that front wheel up in the air and popping your first wheelie. We do this by doing a selection of different things in one coordinated movement. That might sound a little bit daunting, but if you do just bear with it and give it a few tries, it's amazing how they can quickly fall into place and you'll end up getting that front wheel up in the air. As I'm right foot forward, which basically that's my strong foot, when I'm riding down hills or when I'm riding my trials bike, my go-to position is right foot forward. I actually start the wheelie off with the opposite foot of that, so that's my left foot. And as I'm kicking quite hard down with my left foot to help give me the momentum, I'm coordinating that with a preload in my arms. As I pull up, it then comes round to my forward foot. I'll then do a jab on the pedals and combine that with that movement that will result in you popping your front wheel up, and it should look something like this. If you're watching some of your favourite riders doing a manual or a wheelie, because they're probably experienced and because you're not actually doing it yourself, it actually looks from the outside looking in like a really smooth, chilled movement, where the actual reality is it's quite an intense snap, and it's just the same for a wheelie. So if you're struggling with the compression and snap idea, one thing you can do is pull your front brake just a little bit just before you pop it, and as you pop you can then let go of your front brake, and that might just give you a little bit of help with at least the movement of that preload and snap. Windy. That should be another tip. Do as I say and not as I do, and don't wear tight jeans that are likely to get caught in the seat. Not only are you not going to have the movement that you need to keep yourself balanced, there's also the chance of doing what I nearly did there, was when you basically get your seat, your jeans and your seat stuck like that when you're on the back. So that's a massive safety tip. So hopefully that's given you guys an idea of how to get the front wheel up in the air, which is obviously the crucial first step in learning to do a wheelie. The next thing you want to do is learn how to maintain that wheelie and maintain the balance on the back wheel. Similar to the manual, it's all about trying to find that balance point and getting as close to that balance point as possible. Sometimes you can get super dialed, but the reality is when it comes to uneven ground, it's all about going back and forwards over that balance point. But we're going to give you guys a few tips on how to rescue it when the front wheel both seems to be going too low, as well as when the front wheel seems to be going too far back. So once you get your wheelie popped, like you're going to be experts in now, you maintain this by locking your arms in a relatively straight position. You straighten your arms out and then bend them like the slightest bit. So they're not straight, they're not bent, they're nearly straight with the slightest bit of bend. It's about this. We're then going to look straight over the tyre and just try and go for as smooth as possible pedal motions. The smoother you can get and consistent you can get, the better, because you're less likely to then go too far forward with the front wheel or too far back. Basically putting the same amount of torque and pressure through my right pedal stroke and my left pedal stroke, it's a lot more easy to balance, whereas if you start going a bit inconsistent with it, it's harder to balance. So that's a couple of basic points and principles of how to sort of do that wheelie when things are going well, when you're in the balance point. We're now going to look at some of the things you can do to basically, what I would call, save your wheelies when, one, your front wheel's going too low and you need to get that back up a little bit, and two, when your front wheel's too high and you need to get it actually down a little bit to get back in the balance point. And if your front wheel's going too low, you need to make a conscious effort to add a little bit of extra pressure to the pedals, as well as try to get your weight a little bit back. So look a little bit something like this. I'm going along and my front wheel goes too low, so I need to pedal a little bit harder as well as move my weight back. And what that will do is save your front wheel from dropping down to the ground and ending your wheelie and actually getting it back up. We can now look at the flip side of that, to when your front wheel is going too high and you're in danger of flipping off the back. We do this with a completely different technique, and it's back to what I was saying when you're covering your back brake, and that's using what I would call modulated back brake use to just slightly tether your back brake. It's going to help just kill the momentum a little bit, and it will just gradually pull your front wheel down a little bit, and it'll look a little something like this. So I'm wheeling along, and then if I'm going too steep, pull my back brake a little bit and be on my way. Goes too steep again, use my back brake a wee bit there. The whole time there I'm just pushing the limits a little bit, just trying to get a feel for it, and just sort of slowly getting used to how much back brake you need to do. It is a difficult one, depending on your brakes. It's a really hard one to get right, because it's such a fine line between not pulling your back brake enough and flipping off the back, and pulling it too much. So basically, if you don't pull your back brake enough, make sure my jeans aren't going to get caught here. If you don't pull it enough, you'll like loop out like that, which if you're not ready for it can be quite bad. And then if you do it too much, it's going to be like this. Such a fine line between getting that right modulation and pulling it back. It's such a fine line between pulling your brake too hard and too soft, and the reality is it just takes a lot of practice. But again, you'd be amazed with just like say an hour of practice just how much your modulation will come on, and that's a technique and tip that's going to cross over into pretty much all other elements of riding, whether that's trail riding, trials riding, pretty much anything. Modulating the brakes is so important, even though it's not necessarily something you would think of as an obvious thing to learn. So moving on from the back brake modulation, to save yourself from going off the back, similar to a manual, I think a really good trick is actually knowing what it feels like and learning what it feels like to go too far. It might seem kind of counterintuitive, but the more confident you are about where that balance point is, the more likely you are to be able to lock it in to the right place and pop that wheelie for longer. So what I would do with that is actually consciously try and compress and lean so far back that you actually come off your back wheel, but rather than having your feet planted straight on the pedals, you're anticipating that happening and actually being ready to jump off. And what that does is just give you a real sort of good idea of what the range of balance is. It means you know what it's like on the lower end with the front wheel getting too close to the ground, and you know what it's like on the back end with your front wheel getting too far away from the ground and coming straight off the back. So we have now looked at popping the wheelie. We've also looked at how to save it when your front wheel is going too low. We've talked about how to save it when your front wheel is going too high. One of the overlooked things when learning to do a wheelie is actually the side-to-side balance. And if I'm talking personally, if I'm ever losing my balance as a slightly more experienced rider, it's actually because I'm struggling to keep it in a straight line rather than getting that sort of front wheel balance right. Basically what happens is, depending on the wind or even just a slight imbalance in your body weight, you'll start pulling off to the right or pulling off to the left. And there's a couple of tricks you can do to help get yourself back on the straight and narrow and giving yourself the best possible chance to wheelie for longer, and we're going to go through those now. So it's pretty straightforward. When you're doing the wheelie and you find yourself peeling off to the right, what I would do is a really subtle movement in my left knee as I'm pedaling, and what that will do is it's just going to sort of slowly pull myself back into the straight line, and then once we're back straight again, pull your knees back in, you'll go back to looking straight forward, you should be able to straighten yourself up. So I'm moving along, I'm going off to the right, so I just have a little subtle movement with my left leg out, get myself back straight, and be on my way. If you're going too far to the right, a little bit of left leg out, as well as looking. I wouldn't underestimate the power of just looking in the right direction. Sometimes that can even be enough. If it's only a slight adjustment, just a case of just looking a little bit to your left if you're going too far right, and looking to your right if you're going too far left, it can be enough just to get yourself back on track. If you are going quite harshly in one direction, you want to straighten up, just that little bit of sort of leg movement will get you back. It can be quite daunting to add that other axis of movement, but you have to basically embrace it, because it is probably the hardest part, is that left and right movement. But like I say, you can kind of, whilst there is a lot of things going on all at one time, you'd be amazed at how much progress you'll make in like an hour session in your front garden or in your driveway or something like that. And you will just sort of slowly tie all those coordinated movements together, and you'll be popping a mint wheelie in no time. So there we have it. That was my in-depth attempt at teaching you guys how to do a wheelie. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you found it interesting. If you do have any more questions of any of the things I've just talked about there, please comment below and I'll be happy to help you. If you do have any more questions about the bike or any of the other Marin bikes range, again, comment below and either myself or one of the Marin bikes teams will be happy to help. We would also love to hear some content ideas from you guys, so please comment below again, and we will catch you guys next time.